Recording. All right. All right. Genesis 21, the birth of Isaac. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, who Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. And the child grew and was weaned. And Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. And so she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son. For the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not be displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For though Isaac shall your offspring be named, and I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about a distance of a bow shot. For she said, let me not look on the death of the child. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation. And then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him in the land of Egypt. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my descendants, or with my posterity. But as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me and with the land you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. Then Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart? He said, these 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Therefore, that place was called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. Okay. This is a super long chapter. And every single time I've read it uh, in like preparation for this, I've been like, oh, there's more things here, and I'm not going to have time to fully cover it. And so there's going to be times here where I just am like, hey, notice this thing, because this is um, I think in a lot of ways, this seems like it's a very, like, kind of not much happens, right? The next chapter is a big deal, and also for the purposes of the playlist and everybody that sees this future, we're not going to continue covering this because I already covered it a few years ago, and so the rest of the videos are going to be me from a few years ago talking about this. Maybe at some point I'll redo them, but I don't have plans to redo them right now. But one of the points that I make is that the climax of Abraham's life is actually the next chapter, and that's the binding of Isaac's story. Um, and so that needs to be taken in view with this story. But in general, this is an incredibly hyperlinked chapter. There's a lot going on here with previous stories and with stories that will come and with ideas and concepts. And I'm going to say a couple of them quickly, just so that uh, as we go through it, we can kind of think about all of these things sort of at the same time. Um, so as we go through this, think about connections to the story of the fall. Think about connections to the previous story with Hagar, where she where where she goes out and it's the God who sees versus the God who hears. Um, and also notice how much this chapter is talking about wells. Um, and uh, um, and also that we have two stories here that are fundamentally actually about the well at Beersheba. And if you don't pay attention, you'll miss that. You're actually giving two different stories here about the well in Beersheba. So the Lord visited Sarah as he had said. So notice that it's the Lord. I don't know. I have a wrench. Notice that it's the Lord that restores Sarah's ability to make life. In this chapter, God is fixing corruption, both natural and man-made or self-inflicted, right? And so, um, fundamentally, right, uh, the birth of Isaac, the birth of like the child of the promise, is linked to, right. This is linked to God's plan. This is like the fundamental step in God's plan that He talked about of restoring, right, the fall, right. The whole plan of God's Abraham to bless Abraham to bring about a great nation, right. Uh, Specifically through um Isaac, right? Um, the point of that is the fall, and but even in this, right, it is not a God's going to be doing things, but notice how it's still this is a reoccurring thematic theme in Genesis, that God does a thing to fix a problem that came about before, but he doesn't fully fix it. There's a lot of partial fulfillments that continuously happen, right? But uh, and we should think about um, all of the symbolic things that we've been talking about here before, about the relationship between going south, going down, um, right, with going down into Egypt, going down into death, um, and the connection with that with wells, and also the connection with that with um, uh, I think that it should be linked also with the idea of Sarah's ability to have children, right? The ability, right? Because the reason why um, women are associated with this, um, like the Jordan Peterson chaotic aspect, is because of their ability to bring forth, um, to utilize potential to bring forth, um, life, right? Like that, and that is what God is restoring here. So, right, the life giving waters, uh, that's being restored to um to Sarah, right? And um, notice that the the problem, right, where the problem begins again, is also it's when it's on the day that Isaac is weaned, right, which is the day that, right, she stops breastfeeding, right, and so the the problem reasserts itself on the day that Sarah is no longer like bringing forth life anymore to her son, right? And so that's the time where Sarah gets worried again. Um, Now also notice, right? So there's going to be a lot of jumping around, and I'm going to try and limit that. Uh, I also want to spend a little bit of time talking about Isaac's name, right? And unfortunately, I've mentioned this a few times. Step Bible has ruined its best feature, which is that it used to give name meanings in Hebrew. Um, but luckily, there's still the internet and Google. So Isaac means he will laugh or laughter. And for our purposes, I'm mostly going to refer to um, Isaac as just laughter, right? Uh, and so, right, and also you can see that that's the intention of the name, because the Bible will do this thing repeatedly where it'll be like it'll tell a little story, and it'll be like, oh, and that's the reason why it it won't say that's the reason. It'll be like, and it'll say like, therefore his name was that. And Isaac's story, if you remember, is about whenever Sarah first gets told, she laughs or whatever, and that laughter has to do with why he has that name, right? And so the thing that we should obviously be getting from this is when God restores life, that brings about laughter, right? Now, um, this should also be contrasted with the fact that um, whenever Sarah has this problem of she's no longer um, uh, being able to provide for Isaac from herself, she is uh, subjected to the opposite, to negative laughter, right? And so, uh, right, the thing that triggers her, like, so she had this joyous laughter, and then the thing that triggers her is this negative laughter, right? Um, and uh, the thing, and also the thing that you should keep in mind is that um, it's not clear that this laughter was necessarily even like directed at anything to do with um, Sarah or Isaac, right? It just says that um, she saw Hagar laughing. That that's it, right? And it brings about this the idea of misunderstanding laughter and misunderstanding joy, and that when you misunderstand laughter and joy, it can cause you to do things that aren't correct. And I would argue that fundamentally the thing that Sarah does here uh, isn't correct, but God is going to fix it in a way. Um, And I want to use that, right, to segue into this other larger topic, which is definitely a tangentially related one, which is um, this idea. So we're gonna dunk on um, some more traditional Christian denominations. I've heard this from both um, Eastern Orthodox and Catholics, but I feel like I mostly hear it from Catholics. Um, is this tradition that Jesus never laughed? So there's this whole argument that Jesus never laughed and all this stuff. And one of the primary, I think, reasons for it is because there's this idea that laughter is like a form of self-control, or it's a loss of self-control, and that it's a form of breakdown. Um, and so like there's a quote here from Saint Basil, which is, the Christian ought not to laugh nor even suffer laugh makers. Um, and there's this whole uh, like tradition about that, and I'm not going to go like too deep into it, but I just want to highlight it here because I think that's wrong for a lot of reasons, but also in this story, God literally gives laughter, like he, like in a very literal way, gives laughter, and laughter is actually the the means through which his promises are going to be fulfilled. And actually, in the next chapter, the thing that you'll learn, right, is that there is maybe some truth to what people say about being serious, because God is going to ask that laughter be sacrificed, right? Um, but the thing that should be recognized if we are actually Christians is that God cares about that laughter so much that he will take laughter's place so that laughter can live and produce fruit, right? Like if we're gonna do this Christian thing where we say that Jesus is like in a real, he's a fulfillment of like typology of Isaac and all this stuff, like, well then he's actually trying to preserve laughter in people to bring about more fruit in order to grow the family of God. And so that's sort of where I wanted to land on that. um any questions or comments about any of that before we get into this next kind of section here?
No, I just feel really convicted because I've never laughed in my whole life.
Yeah,
So,
you're just
you
so
know,
holy.
yeah, I don't laugh. That's interesting though. Actually, I love that quote from Saint Basil. That's actually hilarious.
Yeah, it's
Like, bet that guy was fun to talk to.
yeah, exactly. I mean,
That's all I got.
just inside writing books all the time. You can't laugh. Um, okay, so the the next thing that I kind of want to bring about, right? So remember, I talked before about how in the previous story is kind of it's kind of a like kind of a redo of the fall, um, and in a broader context, all sin and all conflict is a redo of the fall. But I think we can see it here, um, uh, too, about how, right, there's a casting away, right? They're gonna cast um, them out, but kind of the way that God fixes it, right, is is interesting, right? Because he says, whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. So this brings about another one of those interesting like conversations, right? Of like, um, we've talked before about how, right, just well, if Abraham does it because Abraham is a prophet or Abraham is a good guy, like everything that Abraham does is good, right? And no, I don't think so. I also think that it's interesting because people that will like make that same that will make that same argument will also do goofy things like, I mean, you have people now that argue for polygamy and all this stuff, and usually people that do that aren't very pro like, hey, listen to your wife. um but literally the way that God is fixing this kind of this rehash of the fall is to actually have um Abraham listen to Sarah. And the thing that fundamentally happens here actually is that um there's kind of a return to a monogamous marriage, right? Because Hagar goes away. Um and there I think in some ways that is wrong because it was doing damage to Hagar, but also Hagar shouldn't have been in the picture like to begin with. So it's a little bit of a of it's a catch-22 situation. But God fixes the relationship, right? He does two different things. He fixes the relationship between Abraham and Sarah by having Abraham listen to Sarah, right? And so he's elevating Sarah and making their relationship a partnership again, while at the same time going, hey, in order to do this, you're like, there's an acknowledgement, right? I talk all the time about how there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs, right? Like the trade-off here is, in order to make this relationship with Sarah better, the relationship with Hagar kind of has to get worse necessarily, even though that's not like a fundamentally good thing. And so the way that God fixes that is he goes, I'm going to take care of Hagar, right? Like, and the way that he takes care of Hagar is similar to how, like, again, think about connections to the fall, right? You the casting out of Adam and Eve from the garden is actually necessary to make the situation better, right? And the way that God fixes it is he gives them garments of skin. And so the way that it's fixed is you're given a skin of water, right? And again, notice how this whole chapter is about water and about water coming back up. Um, and and so like the I got sidetracked. Uh, but okay, yes, okay. So now, so it's about water coming back. So a skin of water is given, but also this is connected to, so right. So, and she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba, right? So again, I said I'm going to skip a bunch of stuff, so I'm going to skip, right? So the solution is that she ends up finding a well, right? And the well, right? The well becomes the thing that um, uh, fills up the skin of water. But, and you don't know it whenever this story is said, but you do know it whenever the second story is said, which is that I dug this well, that Abraham dug this well. So, in their sojournings, one of the things, as Abraham's been walking the land for his life that's been going on, right? He's been doing kind of primarily two things. He's been building altars and he's been digging wells, right? And what you do, right, whenever you build altars and you dig wells, is that you are connecting heaven and earth, right? You're connecting the whole you're connecting the whole system, right? And you're aligning the system. You're aligning the potential of the earth, and you're connecting it with the meaning of heaven, with the meaning of God, and you are building a proper hierarchy. And whenever you do that throughout your life, it will it will bless it will bless other people, and it'll bless your posterity and other people, even in ways that you don't know it and that you are not aware of it. And essentially that's what happens with with Hagar and Isaac, right? They right like so two things are going on here, right? So God says that he'll bless them, right? But God is blessing them through earlier actions of Abraham that Abraham didn't realize were going to bless them, right? There's a really important um I think there's a really important lesson and alignment there. Um Especially because this all of this stories and all of this structure is, again, like I said, it's the setup for um for the Binding of Isaac story. And the Binding of Isaac story is a story about um it's a story about binding and setting up something to center around. And you can go listen to me talk like whatever it was 3 or 4 years ago, where I'm talking about that, right? And about how everything kind of centers around the Binding of Isaac story. Um, and that story, right, is an act like that story, like coming up, is an act that is going to bless future generations in ways that Abraham can't comprehend, right? And so you have that like mini fractal um relationship between like planting seeds and it growing into something else later and blessing someone else later. Like that's what all of this stuff it, that's what all of the thematic things in this story is about, right? And it's why like the last thing that happens is that Abraham plants a tree at the well, right? And so um you have to also understand the tree as you have to understand the tree as kind of like an altar, right? A tree does a similar thing that an altar does, which is it goes up, right? It goes up and it grows and it points upwards, right? Um, they all have that vertical relationality to them, um, and they're all like symbols of time. Um, uh, right, like the growing of the tree, which is why all of that is related to the everlasting God, right? It is right, and also I want to point out here, right? Um, so everlasting God. So Olam again. Okay, again, Olam, Hebrew meaning. All right. I thought maybe I was wrong. I thought olam meant age or time period. I wasn't gonna make. I was. I'm failing in my point that I was trying to make. But the the point is that it's a term in relationship with time. Um. Okay. I think I spurred out there a little bit for. Uh. Any comments about that, Christian? About all of the stuff that I just threw out there.
Well, I had this thought a while ago, and I don't know if this is accurate, but it's a thought. So another thing you see with a tree is the way that it's shaped is in some ways feels similar to the way that God shaped the story of redemption. So like with the trunk, how that it stays kind of narrow
Mm.
and then it sprouts out. It's kind of like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, in a sense, like they're the seed, but in another sense, they're almost like the trunk, depending how you want to look at it. And then from there it sprouts out. But um I don't know how much I don't know if that's something you've it's something that I notice is that there seems to be this pattern of almost like, and maybe you have different terminology for this, but like almost like a funnel um funneling event that takes place over and over again. So it's like
Yes. So
I don't know exactly how
the
what to
the
call
the
that, but that's kind of what it seems like.
the so I agree with that. The only thing that I would like augment on that is let me see if I can find it. Is this idea that um there is a funnel, but it goes both ways, right?
Yes.
And
Okay.
and so what happens, right? So there is a narrow path at the meeting of heaven and earth that connects them, but what's happening is all of meaning, so all of the things that is up and airy gets connected with all of the things that are down below and unseen. And so this is all of creation, right, is brought into connection with all of meaning, right? That's sort of what's going on there with a tree symbolically. Like it's not just the part that we see; it's also the part that we don't see, right?
That's
Um,
phenomenal. That's a
yeah.
phenomenal thought. So like the tree is essentially grabbing everything from from underneath and it's funneling all of that material, that substance, and it's then spanning out.
Well, and so you have to also think about it as a cycle. So it's
Yeah.
not just it's not just all going up, but it's also what's up coming down, right? So
Mm.
it's a feedback system, right? Because um right, the more so it's a feedback system, but the hidden thing usually happens first, right? So the bigger the roots, like the big roots happen before the big growth um up top, right? Um, but they go back and forth, right? Because this is collecting stuff and this is collecting stuff. Both sides of it are collecting and growing, right? And so it's not just one takes from one and goes to the other. It like so to relate to like what we're trying to talk about um of like of like spiritually with like how like stuff goes through Christ. Um, so there's multiple ways that you could do this, but it's like so God like comes to earth through Christ, right? Um, but all of the earth goes to heaven through Christ, right? And but those two things happen in a feedback fashion. Um, so like
Would you call it symbiotic or like
yeah, so the
um
more
yeah.
the more that the Holy Spirit and God operates on the earth, the more Christians there like this is this doesn't end this like this thought process, but like the more Christians there are, and so therefore um like the more um meaning and the more like the greater heaven will be, right? And then and those like there's also again the relationship with time here, right? So there's a relationship with like what's happening like now versus like what's like happening like in the future, right? And those two things like um keep going like back and forth.
And the
um
trunk is the intermediary
the trunk
essentially.
the trunk, yeah, the trunk is like the intermediary. The trunk is the so depending upon like symbols of tree symbolism gets used kind of a lot. But like it's the now, it's the depending it's the now, it's the center, like it's a lot of like different things, right? Um, which is why Jesus gets hung on a tree, right? Jesus gets hung on a cross. Jesus gets hung at the point of of a vertical and horizontal like meeting, right? That's what like a cross is, right? There's a lot of like symbolism that's going into there, right? It's the
Mm.
center, right? So I agree with that
It's
aspect.
good stuff. I like that. Yeah.
Um, Evan, you just jumped in here, so you probably don't have
Yeah,
context with what we're saying.
I'm fairly lost on this one actually,
That
because I
that
caught it right at the tail end.
that's fine. Go back and talk about it. I want to mention this last part again, or I just want to mention this last part, this last kind of note that I had, um, which is the story of because I think this also helps relate it with time. Um, so uh, so a couple of different things are going on here with Abimelech and Philcall. So and again, there's a couple of different things. If you just read this over, you'll miss like a lot of it. But there's a bunch of stuff happening here with in relationship with time, right? Um, so in addition to like the, I've said it before that like the stories that are about establishing um, altars and about establishing wells have to do with taking land and the concept of taking land, and is really for right the primary audience of this text is the Israelites, right? And so they're the Israelites as they're going into um, back into the promised land, right? And so these stories help solidify um, their family's place like in the land, like it is like their connection like to the land, right? We've been here, we've been doing stuff, right? So it is that, um, and it is that to the primary audience, but it's also to the people that are in the story, right? Because so Phil Call, the commander of the army, right, like why is he here? Why is he matter? Well, he shows up again in Genesis 26. Where is it at again? If I had actually done this right, where? Where is he at? It says, I thought it said commander of the army.
Yeah, it's verse 26.
There he is. Yeah, boom. And Abimelech went from there, and Philcol, the commander of his army. Right now, this story, right, is happening whenever Isaac is an old man. So there's a lot of debate about whether or not this is the same Philcol, and actually whether or not it's the same Abimelech, like they might be like titles or whatever that are passed down. Either way, it doesn't matter for the purposes that I'm trying to make here, which is that there's a relationship with time going on here, about a connection of time, that right, that these meetings are happening, like again and again, and um uh uh this connection that they're happening. I forgot the point that I was trying to make. Gosh darn it. I thought I had nope. Again, I didn't write all of my notes down. No, I think that was like in all that you do. Oh yeah, no, I was gonna link that. Now I remember. Okay, and Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. Right. Okay, and so they made a covenant at Beersheba. Right. Yes, this is all the stuff I was going to talk about. And Philcol, the man of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Okay, so the part where it says the land of the Philistines here, right? Famously, like the Israelites have problems with the Philistines, right? And so what's going on here? The Philistines here is probably anachronistic, that they probably weren't like there's like some debate about were Abimelech and Philcol, like, are they a part of the Philistines? Like, what were the Philistines there, or is this phrase just in there so that people understand where like Abimelech comes from? And but either way, like this anachronistic like connection, and the reoccurrence of their names is showing that uh, these problems that existed in the past, will show up again in the future, and but that like the point of the overall narrative is that God is going to be there throughout the steps, and that, like I mentioned before at the beginning of this, um, the pointing the pointing to um, like a way to fix problems and a way to fulfill things, but that all of those things are partial fulfillments, right? And um, uh, the the thing that so again the thing that I wanted to highlight here, which um, was Step Bible again, right? So it says, where's the oath part? Oh, I will swear, right? I will swear an oath, right? And then there's the seven ewe lambs apart. These 7 ewe lambs, right? And that place was called Beersheba because both of them swore an oath. What does Beersheba mean? It means well of the oath, or well of the 7, right? And so this story is about naming this well that again, Beersheba is at the bottom, like it's like one of like the southernmost parts of Israel, right? So it's about the naming of this story, um, in time to help. It's to help establish the borders of Israel with their enemies that used to be their friends, um, in a similar way to another story about their enemies, right? The descendants of the descendants of Ishmael that used to be their friends, right? You have a reoccurrence of self-made problems uh, that will need to get fixed in the future. Um, so that was kind of just the thing that I wanted to highlight, the parallels between this story, right, of the Abimelech one with this story, the Hagar one, with the connections of the wells, the connections of time, um, and the connections of what God is doing in both of them. That was all that I had for this portion. I know you missed a lot of it, Evan, but I don't know if either of you have anything that you wanted to add.
I don't.
Okay. We will end it here.